Dr. Burton agreed to do the job in front of a movie camera. "I'll save you for the last, old pioneer," he told Dad. "The best for the last. Since the first day I laid eyes on your great, big, beautiful tonsils, I knew I wouldn't be content until I got my hands on them." "Stop drooling and put away your old scalpel, you old flatterer, you," said Dad. "I intend to be the last. I'll have mine out after the kids get better." Dr. Burton said he would start with Anne and go right down the ladder through Ernestine, Frank, Bill, and Lillian. Martha alone of the older children didn't need to have her tonsils out, the doctor said, and the children younger than Lillian could wait a while. The night before the mass operation, Martha was told she would sleep at the house of Dad's older sister, Aunt Anne. "I don't want you underfoot," Dad informed her. "The children who are going to have their tonsils out won't be able to have any supper tonight or breakfast in the morning. I don't want you around to lord it over them." Martha hadn't forgotten how we neglected her when she finally came down with the measles. She lorded it over us aplenty before she finally departed. "Aunt Anne always has apple pie for breakfast," she said, which we all knew to be perfectly true, except that sometimes it was blueberry instead of apple. "She keeps a jar of donuts in the pantry, and she likes children to eat them." This, too, was unfortunately no more than the simple truth. "Tomorrow morning, when you are awaiting the knife, I will be thinking of you. I shall try, if I am not too full, to dedicate a donut to each of you." She rubbed her stomach with a circular motion and puffed out her cheeks horribly as if she were chewing on a whole donut. She opened an imaginary donut jar and helped herself to another, which she rammed into her mouth. "My goodness, Aunt Anne," she said, pretending that that lady was in the room. "Those donuts are even more delicious than usual." "Well, why don't you have another, Martha?" "Thanks, Aunt Anne, I believe I will." "Why don't you take 2 or 3, Martha?" "I'm so full of apple pie, I don't know whether I could eat 2 more, Aunt Anne. But since it makes you happy to have people eat your cooking, I will do my best." "Hope you choke, Martha dear," we told her. The next morning, the 5 of us selected to give our tonsils for motion study assembled in the parlor. As Martha had predicted, our stomachs were empty. They growled and rumbled. We could hear beds being moved around upstairs, and we knew the wards were being set up again. In the laboratory, which adjoined the parlor, Dad, his movie cameraman, a nurse, and Dr. Burton were converting a desk into an operating table and setting up the cross-section background and lights. Dad came into the parlor, dressed like an Alp again. "All right, Anne, come on." He thumped her on the back and smiled at the rest of us. "There's nothing to it. It will be over in just a few minutes. And think of the fun we'll have looking at the movies and seeing how each of you looks when he's asleep." As he and Anne went out, we could see that his hands were trembling. Sweat was beginning to pop through his white robe. Mother came in and sat with us. Dad had wanted her to watch the operations, but she said she couldn't. After a while, we heard Dad and a nurse walking heavily up the front stairs, and we knew Anne's operation was over and she was being carried to bed. "I know I'm next, and I won't say I'm not scared," Ernestine confided. "But I'm so hungry, all I can think of is Martha and that pie. The lucky dog." "And donuts," said Bill. "The lucky dog." "Can we have pie and donuts after our operations?" Lil asked Mother. "If you want them," said Mother, who had had her tonsils out. Dad came into the room. His robe was dripping sweat now. It looked as if a spring thaw had come to the Alps. "Nothing to it," he said. "And I know we got some great movies. Anne slept just like a baby. All right, Ernestine girl, you're next. Let's go." "I'm not hungry anymore," she said. "Now I'm just scared." A nurse put a napkin saturated with ether over Ern's nose. The last thing she remembered was Mr. Coggin, Dad's photographer, grinding away at the camera. "He should be cranking at 2 revolutions a second," she thought. "I'll count and see if he is. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. That's the way Dad used to count seconds. You have to put the end in between the numbers to count at the right speed. And 1 and 2 and 3. She fell asleep. Dr. Burton peered into her mouth. My God, Gilbreth, he said. I told you I didn't want Martha. You haven't got Martha, Dad said. That's Ernestine. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure, you jackass. Don't you think I know my own children? You must be mistaken, Dr. Burton insisted. Look at her carefully. There. Now, isn't that Martha? You mean to say you think I can't tell one child from another? I don't mean to say anything, except that if that isn't Martha, we've made a horrible mistake. We, Dad squealed. I've made no mistake, and I hope I'm wrong in imagining the sort of mistake you've made. You see, all I know them by is their tonsils, said Dr. Burton. I thought these tonsils were Martha. They were the only pair that didn't have to come out. No, moaned Dad. Oh, no. Then, growing indignant, do you mean to tell me you knocked my little girl unconscious for no reason at all? It looks as if I did just that, Gilbreth. I'm sorry, but it's done. It was damned careless. But you do have an uncommon lot of them, and they all look just alike to me. All right, Burton, Dad said. Sorry I lost my temper. What do we do? I'm going to take them out anyway. They'd have to come out eventually at any rate, and the worst part of an operation is dreading it beforehand. She's done her dreading, and there's no use to make her do it twice. As Dr. Burton leaned over Ernestine, some reflex caused her to knee him in the mouth. Okay, Ernestine, if that's really your name, he muttered. I guess I deserved that. As it turned out, Ernestine's tonsils were recessed and bigger than the doctor had expected. It was a little messy to get at them, and Mr. Coggin, the movie cameraman, was sick in a wastebasket. Don't stop cranking, Dad shouted at him, or your tonsils will be next. I'll pull them out by the roots myself. Crank, by jingo, crank. Mr. Coggin cranked. When the operation was over, Dad and the nurse carried Ernestine upstairs. When Dad came in the parlor to get Frank, he told Mother to send someone over to Aunt Anne's for Martha. Apple pie, donuts or not, she's going to have her tonsils out, he said. I'm not going to go through another day like this one again in a hurry. Frank, Bill, and Lillian had their tonsils out in that order. Then Martha arrived, bawling, kicking, and full of pie and donuts. You said I didn't have to have my tonsils out, and I'm not going to have my tonsils out, she screamed at the doctor. Before he could get her on the desk which served as the operating table, she kicked him in the stomach. The next time I come to your house, he said to Dad as soon as he could get his breath, I'm going to wear a chest protector and a catcher's mask. Then to the nurse, give some ether to Martha, if that's really her name. Yes, I'm Martha, she yelled through the towel. You're making a mistake. I told you she was Martha, Dad said triumphantly. I know, Dr. Burton said. Let's not go into that again. She's Martha, but I've named her tonsils Ernestine. Open your mouth, Martha, you sweet child, and let me get Ernestine's tonsils. Crank on, Mr. Coggin. Your film may be the first photographic record of a man slowly going berserk. All of us felt terribly sick that afternoon, but Martha was in agony. It's a shame, Grandma kept telling Martha, who was named for her and was her especial pet. They shouldn't have let you eat all that stuff and then brought you back here for the butchering. I don't care whether it was the doctor's fault or your father's fault. I'd like to skin them both alive and then scalp them like Red Indians. While we were recuperating, Dad spent considerable time with us, but minimized our discomforts and kept telling us we were just looking for sympathy. Don't tell me, he said. I saw the operations, didn't I? Why, there's only the little, tiniest cut at the back of your throat. I don't understand how you can do all that complaining. Don't you remember the story about the Spartan boy who kept his mouth shut while the fox was chewing on his vitals? It was partly because of our complaining and the desire to show us how the Spartan boy would have had his tonsils out that Dad decided to have only a local anesthetic for his operation. Mother, Grandma, and Dr. Burton all advised against it, but Dad wouldn't listen. Why does everyone want to make a mountain out of a molehill over such a minor operation, he said. I want to keep an eye on Burton and see that he doesn't mess up the job. The first day that we children were well enough to get up, Dad and Mother set out in the car for Dr. Burton's office. Mother had urged Dad to call a taxi. She didn't know how to drive, and she said Dad probably wouldn't feel like doing the driving on the way home. But Dad laughed at her qualms. We'll be back in about an hour, Dad called to us as he tested his 3 horns to make sure he was prepared for any emergency. Wait lunch for us. I'm starving. You've got to hand it to him, Anne admitted as the Pierce Arrow bucked up Wayside Place. He's the bee's knees, all right. We were all scared to death before our operations. And look at him. He's looking forward to it. 2 hours later, a taxicab stopped in front of the house, and the driver jumped out and opened the door for his passengers. Then Mother emerged, pale and red-eyed. She and the driver helped a crumpled mass of moaning blue serge to alight. Dad's hat was rumpled and on sideways. His face was gray and sagging. He wasn't crying, but his eyes were watering. He couldn't speak and he couldn't smile. He sure got a load on, all right, Mrs. Gilbreth, said the driver enviously. And still early afternoon, too. Didn't even know he'd touched the stuff myself. We waited for the lightning to strike, but it didn't. The seriousness of Dad's condition may be adjudged by the fact that he contented himself with a withering look. Keep a civil tongue in your head, said Mother in one of the sharpest speeches of her career. He's deathly ill. Mother and Grandma helped Dad up to his room. We could hear him moaning all the way downstairs. Mother told us all about it that night while Dad was snoring under the effects of sleeping pills. Mother had waited in Dr. Burton's anteroom while the tonsillectomy was being performed. Dad had felt wonderful while under the local anesthetic. When the operation was half over, he had come out into the anteroom, grinning and waving one tonsil and a pair of forceps. One down and one to go, Lily, he had said, completely painless, just like rolling off a log. After what had seemed an interminable time, Dad had come out into the waiting room again and reached for his hat and coat. He was still grinning, only not so wide as before. That's that, he said, almost painless. All right, boss, let's go. I'm still hungry. Then, as Mother watched, his high spirits faded and he began to fall to pieces. I'm stabbed, he moaned. I'm hemorrhaging. Burton, come here, quick. What have you done to me? Dr. Burton came out of his office. It must be said to his credit that he was sincerely sympathetic. Dr. Burton had had his own tonsils out. You'll be all right, old pioneer, he said. You just had to have it the hard way. Dad obviously couldn't drive, so Mother had called the taxi. A man from the garage towed Foolish Carriage home later that night. I tried to drive it home, the garage man told Mother, but I couldn't budge it. I got the engine running all right, but it just spit and bucked every time I put it into gear. Darndest thing I ever saw. I don't think anyone but Mr. Gilbreth understands it, Mother said. Dad spent 2 weeks in bed, and it was the first time any of us remembered his being sick. He couldn't smoke, eat, or talk, but he could glare, and he glared at Bill for 2 full minutes when Bill asked him one afternoon if he had had his tonsils taken out like the Spartans used to have theirs removed. Dad didn't get his voice back until the very day that he finally got out of bed. He was lying there, propped up on pillows, reading his office mail. There was a card from Mr. Coggin, the photographer. Hate to tell you, Mr. Gilbreth, but none of the moving pictures came out. I forgot to take off the inside lens cap. I'm terribly sorry. Coggin. P.S. I quit. Dad threw up the covers and reached for his bathrobe. For the first time in 2 weeks, he spoke. I'll track him down to the ends of the earth, he croaked. I'll take a blunt button hook and pull his tonsils out by the by-jingled roots just like I promised him. He doesn't quit. He's fired. And that is the end of Chapter 10. And tomorrow night we will continue with Chapter 11. Have a good night, everyone.